So in this particular lab, I'm going to be performing enumeration on a target machine that I've just gained initial access to. So as a hacker, once I've gained access onto a machine, the first thing that I'm going to want to do is what we would call enumeration. And basically, it's just a first step to take when I've gained access to the system, like I just said. So why does an attacker want to do that? Because in order to perform certain functions, you have to have certain privileges. So if I, on this target machine right here, I'm going to type in the command ID. And one thing, important thing to notice is like we can see the groups that we're a part of, and we don't see root here. So obviously as an attacker, you're going to want to have root access in order to perform some of the functions that we want to perform. And enumeration gives us a good understanding of what we can take advantage of on the system now that we're on it. So what this particular room is going to do is going to ask us 5 questions. It's going to point us in the right direction. So the first question is, what is the host name of the target system? So in order to get the host name of a target system, we can type in this command right here into our target machine. We're going to type in a host name. And what we see is Wade7363. So that's the name of the host. And the next question is, what is the Linux kernel version of the target system? What is the Linux kernel version? So just to give a brief understanding of what a kernel is basically it sits in between the hardware and the application. So the kernel basically acts as the middleman, if you want to say that, if you want to call it that, more like an intermediary between the two, and helps the two communicate with each other. So you have applications and software sitting on the top, and then you have your hardware, you have your memory, things like that. And the kernel sits there and helps the two communicate with each other. So what is the Linux kernel version of the target machine? In order to get the kernel version, we can run the uname -r command, and that'll give us the 3.13.0 generic .0-24 generic. And it'll make a lot more sense to why understanding or knowing the kernel version of a machine is important when we want to perform an attack. It'll make a lot more sense in the coming questions. So the kernel version is 3.13.0. I believe it was -24 generic. Make sure that's correct. 3.13.0-24 generic. Okay, so the next question is, what Linux is this? So basically it's asking what operating system are we using? So obviously with Linux, we have a bunch of different operating systems. We have Ubuntu, we have Kali Linux, we have Parrot, we have CentOS or CentOS. So in order to find what version of Linux we're running, we can go here, back to our target machine, and type in cat. And then we're going to do /etc/operating system. And then we can do a -release. And there's a bunch of ways we could get this information, but the one that I'm using for this is that particular command, which is the cat etc-os for operating system and release. And we can see that this is a Ubuntu 14.04 LTS. 14.04 LTS. Okay, so what version of the Python language is installed on the system? And if I wanted to get the version of the Python running on the system, I could simply just type Python, and it's going to literally show me Python 2.7.6. And that's the version of Python running on the system. So we type in 2.7.6. And the last question is, what vulnerability seems to affect the kernel of the target system? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this kernel version. And the question again is asking what vulnerability seems to affect the kernel of the target system. So this particular kernel has a vulnerability associated with it. And that's what a CVE is. This is common vulnerabilities and exposure. So it basically associates vulnerabilities with a number. So if I do CVE and then this, and I click here, exploit database, it shows us that for this particular kernel version, for this particular Linux kernel version, which again was 13, it is 3.13.0-24 generic. It's vulnerable to a local privilege escalation vulnerability. And here on exploit.db, we can see that this is the code that it, if executed, can give an attacker root access, which is what we want. Obviously, since right now we just have regular user access, which does not allow us to do much. So as an attacker, with root access, I can do a lot more. So this particular code here, which is written in C, would give us root access. And the particular question was again asking what CVE is associated with it. So the CVE associated with this particular vulnerability is CVE 2015-1328. So I'll copy and paste that into the answer box here. So now that we've successfully enumerated this machine, this target machine that we've gotten initial access to, we can do a lot more. And in the next video, we're going to actually utilize this code that we got from exploit.db and compile it onto the target machine and basically escalate privileges and allow me as an attacker to do a lot more on the target machine. So make sure you watch the next video and we'll get a lot more detailed onto privilege escalation and how we would actually exploit the vulnerability. So stay tuned for the next video. Thanks and peace.